All right, awesome. Welcome, everyone. So, where we're picking up today is on page 102, and we're at the very, very bottom paragraph, and we'll be wrapping up the chapter, working with others. And I don't know if it was last week or the week before, or maybe it was when we first got into the chapter, working with others. We were talking about the idea of the sort of climate that the Big Book was published in the United States. And the 18th Amendment had been repealed. And the 18th Amendment was what made the sale of alcohol illegal in the United States. And so the idea of whether or not people should even be drinking, have alcohol, sell alcohol, that was a contentious topic. That was one of those, you don't want to step in it topics. And so as we continue to read this part of the book, this is a part of the chapter that sort of really describing how the first 100 were kind of trying to navigate that without getting involved into a controversy, without taking position on that side, on either side. And that's the sort of the contentious atmosphere that some of this 12-step work would have been done. So it goes on to say, many of us keep liquor in our homes. We often need it to carry green recruits through a severe hangover. And so in the 1930s, there weren't many of those social safety nets that we have now. There weren't hospitals that were jazzed to take alcoholics. To be fair, I don't think many of them were super excited to take us nowadays. But there weren't many detoxes. There weren't many treatment centers. So when we were working with an alcoholic prospect, we might have to help them through the detox process in the 1930s. 2025, detoxing off alcohol can be so dangerous. Hospital, detox, that sort of thing. So some of us still serve it to our friends, provided they are not alcoholic. But some of us think we should not serve liquor to anyone. We never argue this question. So there are people in those early days of AA that were like, okay, I gotta have liquor to help a green recruit, or my friends who aren't alcoholic, yeah, they can have a drink. And some people were like, nope, we should have nothing to do with it. And you can see that they are threading that needle. We don't have an opinion. We don't know the right way to go. It says, we feel that each family, in the light of their own circumstances, ought to decide for themselves. And it's this beautiful idea that we don't get to make decisions for other people, which, as the Al-Anon within me, I'm like, wait a minute, I want to play God. I want to tell people what they should do. But as we go and move into these later chapters, that's going to be a real theme, giving others the dignity of their own experience. So,
what page is it? What page?
Bottom of 102. Now we are on top of 103. Very top. First full paragraph. Awesome. So it goes on to say, we are careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. And keep in mind, that was something that was common. It goes on to say, experience shows that such an attitude is not helpful to anyone. Now, we don't really see that so often nowadays. But now, and I'm just trying to put this advice into context. I am not judging. I have no opinion. But if you're a smoker or were a smoker, you guys know what that's like when you're smoking before a meeting, and then somebody who used to be a smoker, nothing worse than an ex-smoker, that's like, that'll kill ya, and oh, it stinks, and that sort of thing. I will let you know, I was never shamed into any change for any of my behavior, and saying, oh, nicotine, it's so bad for you. That didn't help. And then, I switched to vaping, and it's like, oh, the nicotine, it tastes like candy. And that's worse than smoking. Well, that didn't help me get anywhere near quitting. That didn't get me open to suggestions. It doesn't work. And actually, God separated me from nicotine. I don't even consider myself an ex-smoker. I could not have done it on my own. But I do remember back in the day when I was smoking, and I would, before a meeting, and somebody would be like, that'll kill you. And I would take this long haul and be like, maybe that's the point. Just to be a dinky-doo. Just not helpful. So that's not helpful, but we tend to not have that opinion around alcohol so strongly nowadays. But I just wanted to put us in the vibe of that feeling. And if you've ever smoked, you know that. So every alcoholic looks for the Spirit among us and is immensely relieved when he finds that we are not witch burners. A spirit of intolerance might repel alcoholics whose lives could have been saved had it not been for such stupidity. And it's a reminder not to bring my prejudices, my biases, my intolerances into working with others, to lay that aside because a life is at stake. Even if, the drama and the contention of the Prohibition era is no longer super relevant. So it says, we would not even do the cause of temperate drinking any good, for not one drinker in 1,000 likes to be told anything about alcohol by one who hates it. And that's why I was using smoking as the metaphor, because it's like, oh, we all know what that's like. So it says, someday, we hope that Alcoholics Anonymous will help the public to a greater realization of the gravity, which is to say the seriousness of the alcoholic problem. But we shall be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness and hostility. And again, the context of what we're talking about is whether or not alcohol should be legal or illegal in the United States. But I'll tell you, when you're in the rooms and somebody is bitter and like hostile and combative, I'm not just super jazzercised to go after what they've got. That hostility, that anger, that you guys kind of know, I joke about that stereotype of that person who you wouldn't want to have a cigarette next to them because you're worried they're going to go up like kindling because they are dry. You guys know dry, just everything is wrong and bad and It's like, if you want what I have, no thank you. You gotta do what I've done. I'll go a different way. No thank you, right? That does not land. So that attitude of bitterness and hostility just doesn't work. And even though we're talking about it in a more generalized way, we can see that doesn't allow us to be as helpful as we could be. And it says, drinkers will not stand for it. Now this last line to tie up the chapter working with others. After all, our problems were of our own making. Rude. Our problems of our own making? Oh man. And yeah, we got to see that. Our problems were created through me, basically through that conscious sense of separateness from God. And I'm operating from selfishness and self-centeredness. And that fuels more self and that cuts me off from God further. And I drink again. And it says bottles were only a symbol. And what that means is that, like alcohol, and we've probably heard this, alcohol wasn't my problem. Which I know when I heard alcohol's not my problem, I'm like, have you seen the name on the door? What do you mean alcohol's not your problem? But alcohol was my attempted solution to what was going on at a deeper level. And what was going on at a deeper level was that I could not stand the way that I felt. And alcohol worked. Alcohol worked better than anything that I have ever found. That effect, that relief, that release, man, that thing that I get when I take a drink, that 3-drink glow or that 6-drink sloppy, more of the 3-drink glow I was after. It doesn't matter where you hit it, but that. And so bottles were only a symbol. The deeper problem is the conscious sense of separateness from God. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous treats. That's what the spiritual awakening treats. The 12 steps bring us to the spiritual awakening. And again, for you guys know, I emphasize allergy obsession, because that is what alcoholism is. The allergy of the body. Once I start to drink, I cannot control the amount that I take. That. And that's often when we talk about, all right, I'm an alcoholic. I know that once I start, I cannot stop. I can never, ever drink again. And we talk a lot about that in the rooms, but often what we don't talk about is, but I will drink again. The obsession of the mind. The thought that I have when I am sober takes me back again and again and again to the first drink, despite the fact that it is ruining my life. And those are the two symptoms of alcoholism, and that's what brings alcoholism to a hopeless condition. But what is fueling that obsession of the mind? And what's fueling that is that spiritual malady, that conscious sense of separateness from God. It's not limited to alcoholics. We don't have a monopoly on spiritual sickness. You go spend some time in traffic, not playing in traffic. I'm not being rude. I mean stuck in traffic. You know, I've had people tell me, "Oh, Paige, you go play in traffic." I am a recovered jaywalker. I do not do that anymore. But spend some time at your HOA or your PTA or your, you know what I mean? Go visit family. You will find some spiritually sick people, right? And so, but that's what is fueling the obsession of the mind. The pain that we have, that when we live in that conscious sense of separateness from God. And that's what we treat. And it says, besides, we have stopped fighting anybody or anything. We have to. And we speak in the 10th step promises that we have stopped fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. So how do I get to this place where I'm not living in this constant conflict? Even if that conflict, I'm a conflict averse human being. So I'm not starting arguments. There are people, God bless them, they just love. They'll start an internet argument just for fun, just because it's a Tuesday and they'd like to. Or they're the person that'll be like, I'm going to be controversial on purpose. Ha ha ha, I'm stirring the pot. That's not how my brain works. I don't like that. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of conflict inside myself. Because somebody will say something and I'll have the judgment and the thing all happening inside. So how do I get free from that conflict? How do I get free from that feeling that I don't fit and the world doesn't work and things aren't enough? That is 4 through 9. The process of steps 4 through 9 is how I begin to really be able to make peace with the world, to stop fighting. And I continue that process in step 10 and 11. Which allows me to continue to live in that position of neutrality, safe and protected. And it says, besides we have stopped fighting anything or anybody, we have to. Now, that's not a must, technically, but I will just say, open a window. It feels a little musty, you know, we have to. I gotta get free. So that is the chapter, working with others. Now let's pop over to the next page. And what we're going to dive into is the chapter 2 wives. Now, I really hope there's people here who don't like 2 wives, who struggle with this chapter. Because this, man, when we go through this, I promise we are going to have a radically new experience with this chapter. We're going to see it in a whole new way. I won't get you to be able to say it's your favorite chapter. I could probably get you that on Family Afterwards. I could do that. But here's the thing. What I'm hoping that we're going to have in 2 wives is like what I like to call a we agnostics experience. So if you're like me, I'll come to the rooms. I have a sponsor that tells me, like, I don't get step 2, so I have a sponsor that tells me read We Agnostics, and I sort of kind of read it, and it makes absolutely no sense to me. I'm confused. Why are we talking about electricity? What is a prosaic steel girder? Like, none of this makes sense. I hate this chapter. What does this have to do with the second step? And then we begin to have an experience. We begin to study it. We begin to read it with people who are properly armed with facts about themselves. And how often that, we agnostics, what is this on about? Becomes, I don't have the ability to put like a poll in the chat, but if I were, I guarantee most of you would be like, we agnostics, that's my favorite chapter. And I believe that's what happens with these later chapters. I don't spend a lot of time studying them. I don't spend a lot of time experiencing them. I don't see them as a mirror, and I don't see how they relate to my experience, so I don't think they're important. I don't think they're valuable, and that's what we're going to do. So my hope is that we can have a we agnostics experience in 2 wives. Now, before I get there, there's a couple myths and misconceptions about this chapter, so I just want to sledgehammer through all of those. Bill Wilson wrote the chapter 2 wives. Bill Wilson wrote it. And you'll often hear this story about how he wanted Anne Smith, Dr. Bob's wife, to write this chapter. But he didn't. He wanted Anne Smith to write a story in the back. Bill Wilson had every intention of writing this chapter. And already at some of those, I'm not having a new experience. That sucks. I hate that. Why is Bill telling me what to do? I get you. Hold on. Whenever we talk about Bill Wilson, and we talk about him as a human being, and I just, every story about Bill Wilson screams to me that Bill Wilson had one sole purpose in life. It's funny, his sole purpose became our primary purpose, to help the alcoholic who still suffered. So the lens through which this chapter is written is the lens of how can we be most helpful to the alcoholic. Absolutely, that is the lens, but that's where his heart was with it. Why did he want to write it? We don't know. We don't know. But that's sort of what I always think about with Bill Wilson. He wanted to be the most helpful he could to alcoholics. And when you study the history, you study the traditions, you study sort of Bill's own lived experience, you can see that. And even some of the stuff that was a little controversial, you see it through the lens of, but he wanted to help alcoholics that maybe we couldn't help. So that is what I want to put into context. Now, the title. So we agnostics, we spend a whole lot of time talking about the title, we agnostics. We're going to spend some time talking about the title, Two Wives. Now, I will say everybody makes well, not everybody. It's usually guys at the meeting. The guys at the meeting will be like, two wives? But they don't make that joke about two employers. I'm just kidding. But I get two. We don't say that when we get to that chapter. But what I found is in this case, when we look at the chapter Two Wives, we're often held back by the context of the chapter. And I am going to encourage us, or held by the context of the title of the chapter. And I'm going to encourage us to lay aside what we think the title means. Lay aside gender roles of the 1930s. Lay aside that. Because I read Two Wives and I think it's that. And I'm like, gross, I'm not interested. And what I would encourage us to do, you don't have to. I'm not your sponsor unless I am. In which case, take a suggestion or two. What I would like us to do is cross out the word wives. So this is not a chapter Two Wives. This is a chapter 2. And I'll say this a couple times. And I've got a couple of different things you can write. But it is the chapter To Those as Bound to the Alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. And I will say it again. So instead of Two Wives, it is the chapter To Those as Bound to the Alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. You can also say to the unhealed codependent, to the untreated Al-Anon. This is who this chapter is for. It's not about gender. It's about the people who cannot quit the alcoholic, just as I could not quit alcohol. And when we go through this chapter with that lens, it is radically going to change how we view and approach this chapter. I'll say it again, and I know it's fine if when we get to the sharing portion, if you're like, could you say that again? Yes, I do not mind at all. So it is to those as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol, to the unhealed codependent or the untreated Al-Anon. That is who this chapter is for. So it says, with few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Well, that's good news for us. Hey, gals? Like, yikes. But also, I want to throw something out. When this book was written and when it was published, there was like one woman who had been able to string together a little bit of time, and her name was Florence Rankin, and she didn't stay sober. So when any time in this book we read men and women, I think that's an important line. And I, again, think it speaks to Bill Wilson's primary purpose, his purpose in life. He wanted to help the alcoholics. And women was hopeful, was inclusive, was like aspirational. Because they had Florence But then Marty Mann and Sylvia Kay out of Cleveland, they started, I believe, out of Cleveland. If she was out of Chicago and I was wrong, I don't stand much, but I do stand to be corrected. All right, so, and it says, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Well, for those of us who are recovered, it was applicable. Our activities in behalf of women who drink are on the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they tried our suggestions. And in those early days, it was not easy for women in Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of the dudes were like, you're just after my husband. Listen, he's not the catch you think he is. I'm just kidding. But like, there was that jealousy and that and all of that. And it was not easy. And some of these women were real trailblazers, and we're going through some tough stuff to be there. And again, they were wanted, like Bill wanted us, ladies, and I don't mean in a creepy way. I mean, he wanted alcoholics who were suffering to recover, regardless of where they were from. So it goes on to say, but for every man who drinks, others are involved. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands because I know we don't want to do this because this is one of those but many of us came to the rooms and I was the only one I hurt by my drinking. My drinking only hurt me. I didn't affect anyone else. I was drinking alone. Yeah, I was drinking alone. I was hiding it. I was the only one that was hurt. And how wrong we are. How wrong we are. I hope by the time we're, at page 104, chapter 8, 2 wives. That's my sneaky, just in case anyone didn't know where we were. But that, at this point, we see how destructive destroying ourselves is, and how heartbreaking it is for those who love us to watch ourselves burn to the ground again and again, and to hurt them. So it says, the wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who see their son wasting away. Among us, our wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved. And I want to emphasize has been solved. What we're talking about is the solution. So among us are these wives, these relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved, recovered. That doesn't mean that we're cured. That doesn't mean, but that the alcoholic is able to stay sober, contingent on the maintenance of their spiritual condition. Continuing steps 10, 11, and 12. That's what we're talking about. And it says, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. And it says, we want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic. And that's what we're talking about. Those who are bound to the alcoholic for whatever reason. And as we go through this chapter, and if you're and what we're going to get into is going to be a really interesting part of the book. And if you're reading this part of the book through the lens of, I would not put up with that. If somebody ever treated me like this, I would be done. Yes. This doesn't apply for that then. It doesn't apply to you. It's kind of like if you share the big book with a non-alcoholic and you're talking about some of the stuff that happens to us and tearing down the structures of business and romance and tearing it to pieces, and somebody is like, no, if alcohol ever did that to me, I would quit. Great. This isn't applicable, right? So it's important to understand what we're actually going to be doing is qualifying the Al-Anon. Bear with me with this. So as wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. We want to analyze the mistakes we have made. We want to leave you with the feeling, and this is powerful, that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome. And there's an interesting thing. We're not going to see it here yet, but that promise is available whether the alcoholic gets sober or not. That no unhappiness is too great. And I do a lot of big book studies, and many of them, my friend Rob's there, and he's always putting stuff in the chat, and he will point out all the places where it talks about how this way of life will solve our problems, not simply my alcoholism, but that idea that this way of life will work with whatever I am facing. That no situation is too great. And we can extrapolate it to whatever situation we are facing. No situation is too difficult. No unhappiness too great to be overcome. That doesn't mean the external situation will change. But what is promised is that my heart posture will change. My internal condition can change. How I see it can change. And that is powerful. And so it goes on to say, we have traveled a rocky road, and I always think about ice cream when we get to that part. We have traveled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. Now, as we go through this part of the book, I want to direct our attention to page 31. Actually, you know what? Let's pop over there. Let's go to page 31, and we're gonna see something. So let's go to page 31, and we're gonna go to the second full paragraph. It's about halfway down the page, on page 31. In the chapter more about alcoholism. And so this is a mirror that we get to hold our experience up to. It says, here are some of the methods we tried. And then it goes into all the ways we as alcoholics tried to control our drinking or to stay sober. And there's an interesting thing that you'll notice as I read through this paragraph, that there is a progression that happens. As we go through this paragraph, it'll start with just trying to control our drinking. And as we get to the bottom, it's like, how do I stop? And so it says, here are some of the methods we tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, the antioxidants, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip. And we're seeing that trying to stay away from alcohol, swearing off forever with and without solemn oath, taking more physical exercise. We're trying to put these things between us and the first drink, reading inspirational books, going to health farms, sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitments to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum. So we go from, I'm just going to stick to beer, to being locked away in an asylum. And we see that progression. And that is stuff that's a mirror that is holding up to us to say, have I done those things? Have I tried those things? Doesn't matter if you switch scotch to brandy, but did you switch your drinks? Did you switch your substances? Did I do these things? Is that my experience? And it's a mirror to see that loss of control, the allergy, and the loss of choice, the obsession. Now, as we go back to page 104, what we're going to do for the next few pages is exactly that. It is a mirror to see for the untreated Al-Anon, for the unhealed codependent, for those as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. We're going to see, have I tried all of these things to fix, to change, to save, to cure, to manage? And did it not work? And just as we saw in that brief paragraph on 31, a progression, we're going to see a progression in these pages. So it says, we have traveled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. Now, so again, there's a couple ways we can look at this. We can look at it as, have I been in a codependent relationship with somebody who is drinking, who doesn't want to quit drinking? Maybe they have a manifestation of the illness that is not alcohol. Is there a loved one that doesn't want to quit? Or do I just want to go through the lens of this? This is the power of alcoholism. The people that I love, I do this to. I hurt them in ways I never wanted to hurt them. We can look at that through those lenses, And so it says, we have had long rendezvous. So like rendezvous, think like a romantic getaway. But imagine this one-on-one romantic getaway with hurt pride, frustration, there's frustration again, self-pity, misunderstanding, and fear. These are not pleasant companions. So what it's asking is, have you gone through this? Have you had those periods where you're feeling hurt pride? You're feeling frustrated. You're feeling that, oh, poor me, and that victim, and it's unfair, and self-pity. Also that misunderstanding and driven by fear. And those aren't, we say fear and faith can't live in the same house. I don't think that's true. I think I almost need to have fear to have faith. But here's what I know is I can't feel the presence of God when I got all those roommates. When I'm living with all those, I can't feel that nearness of my Creator. It says we have been driven to maudlin sympathy, and that maudlin is that self-pitying sympathy, to bitter resentment. Some of us veered from extreme to extreme. And we see that pendulum swing to that poor me, how could you do this to me? To that how could you do that anger, F you, kicking down the door, slamming the stuff like that. That. And either side doesn't work. It doesn't make a dent. And it says some of us veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. Because we can see, the family members, they can see within us, and we can see it in each other too, that beneath that pain, beneath that selfishness, beneath that self-centeredness, is something special. There's this beautiful, wonderful, I'll use the word child of God if that language doesn't resonate with you. Man, what I'm talking about is that thing that we experience when we take this course of action, when we work these steps with the seriousness that they demand, or at least I should say the seriousness my illness demands. These things that are not me fall away, and what emerges is something that is inherently good and worthy and valuable, and I didn't think it existed. But you know what it's like when you can see it in that puking drunk that's in the meeting that you just love them and you just wanted them to get it. That's what we're talking about. And so again, we hold the potential Al-Anons hold themselves up to these standards. Our loyalty and the desire that our husbands hold up their heads and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. We have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. Have I done that? We have told innumerable lies to protect our pride and our husband's reputation. Can I relate to that? We have prayed. We have begged. We have been patient. Have I done that? We have struck out viciously. We have run away. And that run away, we can see they've tried to leave, just like I tried to stay sober. We've been hysterical. We've been terror-stricken. We have sought sympathy. We have had retaliatory love affairs with other men. Can I relate to that? And even if we're the alcoholic, and I'll be honest, many of us can relate to those sorts of relationships where it is fueled by alcohol and fueled by codependency. Or maybe it's just me, but I relate, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've been there, right? And what it goes on to say, our homes have been battlegrounds many an evening. In the morning, we have kissed and made up. Our friends have counseled, chucking the men, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. Now, I'm going to point something out. I forgot to grab it ahead of time. But if you remember, actually, I will. Boop, boop. There we are. What I will do is I will share the screen. And I'll show this to you guys. For those that haven't seen it before, for some of you it's like, oh girl, this is familiar. So this is the cycle. And we're going to see the cycle of alcoholism as it pertains to alcoholism in the next sentence. But what it is saying is that these Al-Anons, these people that love us and cannot quit us, they do that same thing that we do, which is to say, never again. I am never going to let you treat me like that again. I am done. I am breaking up. I am leaving. I'm setting a firm boundary. I'm not going to put up with this again. Just like I say, I'm never going to drink again. And what is at root fueling them is the same thing that is fueling me. It is a conscious sense of separateness from God. It is a spiritual malady. And that's why I talk about I can't diagnose alcoholism based off that, because there are other people who have this. But again, that is what the 12 steps treat. More specifically, that is what the spiritual awakening treats. And so when it says that our friends have counseled checking the men, and we have done so with finality, that is the swearing off. But then it says only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. What kicked in was the obsession of the mind. This time will be different. Not nobody will ever, but actually sometimes it is. Just one more fling, nobody will ever know. Right? It is that exact same thought. This time will be different. And they come back. And what I always want to emphasize is if it is a cycle, and I have examples from my own life of the cycle, what that means is that I can't overcome it on my own power. It goes on to say, our men have sworn great solemn oaths that they were through drinking forever. So just like that, that same swearing off, I'm done, I'm never going to drink again. And that has no power to keep me sober. We believed them when no one else could or would, and then in a few days, weeks, or months, a fresh outburst. And the outburst always starts with the obsession of the mind. Before I take a drink, I need to have a thought, and that thought tells me that I can drink, that it'll be okay, that nobody will know, or it won't be okay, and I don't even care about the consequences. And this helps to visualize what step one is. Step one, the first step, is absolutely not that I can never ever drink again. The first step is that I can never ever drink again. And I will. And it's just the same for the people to whom this chapter is addressing. They need to leave. They want to leave. But they are just as unable to leave as I am able to leave it alone, to not take that first drink. And when I can see myself in this cycle, I see that I am powerless. I see that I am hopeless. I see that there's not a way out. And for all of us, what is the answer? Well, the answer is a spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening. That is our solution. And how we get there is the 12 steps. And that's what takes us from that place of hopelessness to that place of hope. So it says, we seldom had friends in our homes, never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. We could make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. And you see that isolation that begins to happen. It goes on to say, when we were invited out, our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they spoiled the occasion. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. Now, can we relate to this part of it? Like, let's take off any Al-Anon hat. Let's throw on that alcoholic hat right now. Anyone ever go to like a party or a business function and you snuck drinks? All I'm gonna say is if you don't have the physical allergy, why would you need to sneak them? You know what I mean? Like if I'm sneaking them because I know that somebody doesn't think I should be drinking. You know why they think I shouldn't be drinking? Because I got the allergy, because I can't control the amount that I take once I start. And can I relate to that person where it's like, and that happens too, where it's like in sobriety, when we, start going to things where there is alcohol. We spoke about the conditions upon which we can do that in the chapter Working with Others, that I am recovered, that I'm working with others, that I'm spiritually fit. But there's almost that thought that I'm the only one I'm the only one not drinking. I remember this was probably like 10 years ago. But in July we have what's called the Calgary Stampede. And it's like 2 weeks of drunken cowboys is what that is, and there was a stampede event, and it's these corporate things. And I knew two people that were at that event, and it is a lot of drinking. And the two of them were like separately, they didn't know the other one was there, but at that, I'm the only one at that party that wasn't drinking. No, we're just so wrapped up in self, right? And God, they weren't those two weren't necessarily, but just in that sense of like, I often think I get stuck in self. So can I relate to like, oh, you won't let me drink or I'm not allowed to, and the self-pity, right? Can I relate to that? And that self-pity tells me I don't have a solution for how I'm feeling. It says there was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. An armored car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. I have a friend who he's married and he jokes about like, yeah, direct deposit really messed up that one. I can't hide the check if there's direct deposit. It says the checking account melted like the snow in June. And even though where I live in Canada, we don't typically have snow in June, but we get some hail and we can get some, we had some not great weather this June. But those of you who are living in the AC, the places where you gotta have your AC, imagine putting some snow outside. It's gone. It's gone, right? Does that sound familiar? The type of home atmosphere my drinking was creating. That there was not financial security. Now, bear with me. It goes on to say, sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery? How cruel to be told they understood our men as we did not. Again, even if I'm like, oh, somebody cheated on me, I'd be gone. Good for you. That's lovely to have that sense of self-worth and self-esteem and ability to do that. But okay. But also, that idea that, man, that is the power this illness has, that can cause people to cross lines that we would never cross and hurt people in ways we would never hurt people, and to be wrapped up in a horrific level of selfishness where we're justifying that behavior. It says, the bill collectors, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, and even the ladies they sometimes brought home. I will just say, if you bring home another lady, I don't think my response is, my response of being kind of irate would not be inhospitable, and I don't think I'm an egg or a wet blanket for that. I'm just going to throw that out there. But can I actually, genuinely, because I was in a relationship with an alcoholic for many, many years. Shocking, I know. And I remember this was like, I don't know, like maybe a year or two ago, I was talking with my mom and he came up and my ex came up in conversation, and she meant this without a hint of irony. Like, she said this and she wasn't trying to be funny, but it was the funniest thing I've ever heard. She said, you know, he wasn't all bad. He introduced us to a lot of interesting people. Like the police. Like she wasn't even trying to be hilarious. And the paramedics. And yeah, just a social butterfly, that guy. So it says, our husbands thought we were so inhospitable. Joy killer, nag, wet blanket. That's what they said. The next day they would be themselves again. And we forgive and would forgive and try to forget. We have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. We have told small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realized. And this is hard. They struck the children, kicked out the door panels, smashed treasured crockery, ripped the keys out of pianos. And that is abuse. That abusive behavior. And I can tell you that there are ways in which I showed up that I would never show up if I was sober and working a program, and doing things that I would never do if I was living this way of life. Man, that is how awful this illness is. And that is the power this illness has. Because I'll tell you, I never wanted to be like that sort of person. I never wanted to stay with that sort of person. Like that is the power this illness has. And so when we say just don't drink, man, I can't not just don't drink. I don't ever want to be that person, but I'm up against an illness that will drag me into that horror and that misery. And again, this points to why sobriety is not a solution. I mean, of course, if I'm bringing bums and pals home, I got to make an amends for that. But I've probably done a lot more than that. I've created eggshells. I've created emotional insecurity within the home. I've got to repair. I've got to repair that damage done. And it says, in such pandemonium, they may have rushed out threatening to live with the other woman forever. It says, in desperation, we have even got tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. And I remember when I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, I genuinely, I didn't have a problem, you guys. I was not an alcoholic. He was the alcoholic. Now, I know that I would drink a little bit, but some of you guys are getting the delusion and the denial that I showed up here with, but I genuinely thought if he could get his stuff together, I wouldn't have any problems. I genuinely thought, that he was the issue. And I will say there was a 16-year age difference. Daddy issues. But in that 16-year age difference, he had been active in his illness. And so he would wake up in the mornings, and if we didn't get to the liquor store at 10 in the morning, he would often have an alcoholic-induced seizure. And that was sort of, and so I'm holding my little standard to that. Now, could I control when I started? No. Was I crossing lines I didn't want to cross? Absolutely. Did I say I never want to drink again? Absolutely. And did that have any effect? Absolutely not. But I didn't think I had a problem because I legitimately was like, I don't have seizures. I don't have alcoholism, genuinely. And so I remember taking him to some meetings so y'all could fix him. What I will say is you didn't do a good job on that. I'd like a refund. I'm just kidding. But I would show, and I remember we're being at a meeting and we're at this part of the book, and I'm just going to throw it out there. The flag might have been a little red because I really related to this part in particular where it said, in desperation, we have even gotten tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. And I'm like, that is right. I really had to do a lot of drinking at his drinking. Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah. I didn't see it yet. You guys now see why page 44 was so helpful for me to see who I was. It says the unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it. And it says perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. So again, that's separating. I'm swearing off. I'm done. And a divorce is I'm done. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. But usually we did not leave. We stayed on and on. And again, just like I went through this cycle of my alcoholism, those is bound to the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. They go through this same cycle with us. They want to leave. They can't leave. It is just as heartbreaking, if not more. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us and our families. We began to ask, and again, some of that is the parents criticizing for desertion. That can happen regardless of the era. But in the 1930s, it wasn't as common for women. It was not as common as it is today for women to work. But again, that even if we contextualize it in 2025, that idea that the non-alcoholic is taking on the whole responsibility for the family, the home, the finances, taking on all that responsibility. When I was in my illness, did I abdicate responsibility? Because I just couldn't show up and I just couldn't do it. And it says, we began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. And this is an interesting thing to note. I'm just going to go back to the cycle for a second. Now, oftentimes, when we come to the rooms, or even when we try on our own to stay sober, we say, that's it. I'm never going to drink again. And we're able to put it down for maybe 9 months, maybe even a year, we're able to put it down. But at some point, the obsession of the mind kicks in. And I get a thought that this time will be different. And I go, and off I go. And I drink again. And for those of us who've been around this cycle, and now let's be honest, it's all of us. We've all been on this cycle. There's an interesting thing that happens. The more that I'm on this cycle, the shorter the period in between my swearing off and that first drink gets. So it goes from 9 months to maybe 6 months, and then 6 months, and then maybe 3 months, and then 3 months, and then 2 months, and then 1 month. And by the end of it, we can't make it a week sober. We can't make it a couple days sober. That is, and if we're like, oh man, that's me, that's what happened to me, that is the progressive nature of this illness. And so as the sprees got closer together, and the sprees oftentimes get longer. So the sprees get longer, the periods of sobriety get shorter, and it starts happening again and again and again and again. Does that sound like me? That's that illness. The illness that is alcoholism and the hopelessness that is alcoholism. Because I don't want to be doing it, and yet I'm doomed to do it again. And it says the alarming physical and mental symptoms. Now, it's also like referring to, physically and mentally what's happening to the alcoholic. But again, to diagnose alcoholism, the physical symptom is the allergy of the body. What happens once I start to drink? Do I have the ability to control it every single time? And the obsession of the mind. What happens when I try to stay sober? Does that have any effect? So it's as the alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pull of remorse, depression, and inferiority that settled down on our loved ones. That ability to watch us deteriorating away, filled with that guilt and shame and remorse, that pain that is all consuming. It says these things terrified and distracted us as animals on a treadmill. And I love that example of a treadmill because I sort of visually think like a hamster wheel, like we're climbing this thing. It says we have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Greek myth of Sisyphus, but Sisyphus, he was condemned by the Greek gods. And I think the Roman gods had a similar mythology. And what he was doomed was to roll a boulder up a hill. And as soon as the boulder got right close, it would fall down again. And that's what it is like. For two things. One, that is what it is like for me as an alcoholic to try to stay sober on human power, on my power, on self-will, on self-knowledge. I'm trying to push a boulder up a hill, and what will inevitably happen is it falls back down. I will drink again. And just as much is that the Al-Anon, trying to keep us sober, trying to keep us together, trying to save us, trying to fix us, pushing that boulder up the hill, and it falls down. And the reason why that treadmill, that exhaustion, is because it's not like I wasn't doing things. It wasn't like I wasn't trying. It wasn't like I wasn't working, but what I did could not and would not work. It was an impossible task for a human being. It is an impossible task for an alcoholic to stay sober on willpower. And it is an impossible task for an alcoholic to stay sober on human power, like an Al-Anon, like a loved one, like somebody who wants to save me. It does not work for people like us. It is impossible. And it says most of us, I'll stop the share, most of us have entered that final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails, detoxes, rehabs, sober living, treatment centers, emergency rooms, psychiatric facilities, again and again and again. It says sometimes there was screaming, delirium, and insanity. Death was often near. And actually, when it talks about the screaming, delirium, and insanity, I remember a time I was with my ex, and all he had was alcohol. There was no other substances. and we were on a train, and a local train, and I remember he was like staring and yelling and getting to it. You looking at me like getting into one of those fun social interactions. I wonder why I don't like conflict. But he was picking a fight, and there was nobody there. He was staring into the eyes of somebody that wasn't there and picking a fight. And like that's what we're talking about, that beginning to lose it, that delirium, that insanity. Death was often near. Now that death being near will happen, whether I think it's near or not. I just want to emphasize that as well. Oftentimes I'm like, no, it's not that bad. It's not that bad, but I don't get to choose, right? And so that's actually a natural stopping point, and I'm at the time, so we'll leave it there and we'll pick up next week and continue to hopefully have a new experience with this chapter. So thank you.